By 4:11 that afternoon, Regina Ashworth would owe her life to a man whose name she hadn't bothered to learn in the 11 minutes she'd known him. At 4 o'clock, she'd been irritated that he was driving too slowly. Marcus Delgado had been a patient transport driver at Cresthaven Private Hospital for 6 years, ferrying patients and the occasional impatient board member between buildings, appointments, and the airport in a black company sedan that always smelled faintly of hand sanitizer. He was 58, broad-shouldered but quiet in his movements, gray beginning to overtake the dark hair at his temples. And he wore the same unremarkable Navy uniform every driver on the fleet wore. No name tag beyond a small plastic clip on the dashboard that most passengers never glanced at. He had a habit that his coworkers found mildly odd. He kept a folded stethoscope in the glove compartment, wrapped in a cloth, though no one had ever seen him use it, and no one had ever asked. Regina Ashworth was 53, a senior board member at the hospital's parent healthcare group. Dressed that afternoon in a tailored ivory suit for a donor luncheon she was already running 11 minutes late for. She slid into the back seat of the sedan with her phone already at her ear, mid-sentence in a call about quarterly projections, and said only Cresthaven Tower side entrance, and quickly, before returning to her conversation without looking at the driver's face. Marcus pulled into traffic without comment. He had learned years ago that some passengers wanted conversation and some wanted silence, and Regina Ashworth was unmistakably the second kind. He did not mind. There was a particular peace in silence, one he had come to depend on more than most people would understand. Before we continue, if you believe that skill has no job title and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. Marcus had once been Dr. Marcus Delgado, a cardiothoracic surgeon with 11 years of practice and a reputation in the hospital where he'd trained. For hands so steady that residents used to watch him operate the way music students watch a concert pianist. That life had ended on a Tuesday in early spring 9 years earlier, on an operating table where a patient, a 34-year-old father of 2, undergoing a routine valve repair, had suffered a catastrophic complication that no review board, no malpractice hearing, and no colleague's careful reassurance had ever fully convinced Marcus wasn't his fault. The investigation cleared him of negligence. It made no difference. He surrendered his surgical privileges within the month, took a leave that quietly became permanent, and did not touch another scalpel for 8 years. He kept the stethoscope. He never fully explained even to himself why. The job driving patients had come almost by accident. A former colleague who ran hospital operations, aware of Marcus's history and unwilling to let him disappear entirely, had offered him the position with no explanation required and none given. Marcus had taken it because it let him stay close to a world he could no longer fully belong to, close enough to see ambulances arrive, close enough to hear the overhead pages, far enough that no one's life depended on his hands again. He told himself that was enough. Most days it almost was. Traffic on the interstate thickened without warning 8 minutes into the drive. A jackknifed delivery truck 2 lanes over, emergency lights already flashing in the distance, the kind of gridlock that turns a 15-minute drive into something with no visible end. Marcus checked his mirrors, calculated an alternate route, and had just begun explaining the detour to his passenger when Regina Ashworth's voice cut off mid-sentence behind him. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Her phone had slipped from her hand. Her face had gone the particular gray-white color Marcus recognized before he'd fully processed what he was looking at, and her right hand was pressed flat against her chest. "Ma'am?" No response. "Ms. Ashworth." She made a small, strangled sound and slumped sideways against the door. Marcus did not hesitate, though later, describing it, he would say that the version of him who acted in the next 90 seconds felt less like a decision and more like a door that had simply been standing unlocked the whole time, waiting. He pulled the sedan onto the narrow shoulder between 2 lanes of stopped traffic, threw the car into park, and was in the back seat within seconds, 2 fingers at her throat, counting. Pulse present but wildly irregular. Breathing shallow, he recognized the pattern with a certainty that arrived faster than thought. a cardiac event, likely an arrhythmia complicating what he suspected. From the faint blue tinge already reaching her lips, might already be progressing toward arrest. There was no ambulance reachable through the gridlock in any useful window of time. There was a hospital 11 minutes away that traffic made impossible to reach by road. He called it in on the dispatch radio with a voice so calm the operator later said she assumed, for the first 10 seconds, that she was speaking to a paramedic. Cardiac event in transit, patient unresponsive, requesting immediate ambulance intercept and a cardiac response team standing by. Then he opened the glove compartment, unwrapped the stethoscope his hands hadn't held with purpose in 9 years, and went to work with what he had, his hands, his voice, and 11 years of training that had never actually left him, whatever else he'd told himself in the time since. He began chest compressions when her pulse failed entirely 30 seconds later, counting aloud in the same measured rhythm he'd once used in operating rooms with a dozen people watching. Except now the only witness was a stalled line of commuters and a dispatcher on the radio relaying his exact words to an ambulance crew fighting through traffic from the opposite direction. He did not stop. He did not falter. Something in him that had been folded away for 9 years unfolded completely, and for 4 minutes on the shoulder of a gridlocked interstate, Marcus Delgado was, again, entirely and only a surgeon. Regina Ashworth's heart restarted 40 seconds before the ambulance crew reached the car. Marcus was still kneeling over her, one hand steady at her pulse. When the paramedics pulled the door open and the lead paramedic, a woman who had worked cardiac cases for 15 years, looked at what Marcus had done, looked at him and said only, "Who are you?" "I used to be a surgeon," Marcus said. Regina Ashworth woke in the cardiac unit 6 hours later to find the hospital's chief of medicine standing at her bedside, along with 2 board members, all 3 of them wanting to know the same thing she wanted to know: the name of her driver. She asked to see him 3 days later, once she was stable enough to receive visitors and lucid enough to remember in pieces. The sound of a voice counting numbers above her while the world outside the car window sat perfectly, terribly still. Marcus came in his uniform because it was the only thing he had that felt honest to wear. "You saved my life on the side of a highway," she said, "with a stethoscope from your glove compartment." "I did what anyone with the training would have done," Marcus said. "No," Regina said. "You did what almost no one currently employed at this hospital could have done. In a car, alone, with nothing. I looked up your file this morning. 11 years of surgical practice, cleared of negligence, and you left anyway." She studied him for a long moment. "Why are you driving a car for people who never learned your name?" Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, it was the first time in 9 years he'd said the sentence out loud to anyone. "Because I was afraid of what would happen the next time someone's life was actually in my hands." "It was in your hands 3 days ago," Regina said quietly. "You didn't drop it." What followed was not a return to the operating room, not immediately, and Regina was careful never to suggest it should be treated as simple or fast. She used her position on the board to sponsor a structured re-credentialing process, supervised and gradual, built around Marcus's actual readiness rather than anyone else's convenience. He spent a year in supervised clinical work before he ever touched a scalpel again, rebuilding not his skill, which had never truly left him, but the trust in his own hands that 9 years of silence had worn down to almost nothing. He performed his first surgery in a decade on a bright Tuesday morning, 18 months after the day on the highway shoulder, a routine valve repair, the same procedure that had once ended his career. And this time he closed the final suture with hands that did not shake at all. Regina Ashworth watched from the observation gallery, arms crossed, saying nothing, exactly the way she watched every important thing in her life. But she was there, and everyone in the room knew why. Marcus kept the stethoscope from the glove compartment. It sits now in a drawer in his office, still wrapped in the same cloth, not because he needs it anymore, but because he has never quite been able to put away the thing that reminded him, on an ordinary afternoon in stalled traffic, that some doors only look locked from the outside. If this story moved you, Please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, has fear of failure ever kept you from something you were truly meant to do?